Hey everybody, and thank you for watching another video. My name is Murge, and welcome to the Breaking Bad What If series that I call the Heisenverse, a series where I make a change somewhere in the Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul timeline and see how that one change ripples out the entire universe. And in this video, we explore the possibility of Nacho Varga getting out the game and finally starting over. But in order for him to get that fresh start, he'd have to once again plot against the Salamanca. But given the position that Nacho's in, that would only be half the battle, because the other half would be getting around the chicken man himself, Gustavo Fring. And if he did somehow manage to pull this off, what would be the fallout from that decision? Would he finally get the happy ending that he always wanted? Or would things for everyone around him just get worse? Well, that's what we're here to find out today. And before we get started, if you could leave a like on this video to support the channel, I'd appreciate it. And also, comment down below your favorite Nacho Varga moment, just so I know it's real. But now, let's get into it. Once he was able to make bail, Lalo Salamanca is able to walk away a free man. And after a quick talk with Saul about what took him so long, when Nacho pulls up, Lalo tells him that he's headed back across the border, but he'll be back and they'll definitely work together again. And after giving him the go-ahead to leave him at the well, Nacho gets back into his car and he's able to breathe a sigh of relief that he's finally done with the Salamancas for a while and he can actually start planning on getting out the game. But the moment he puts his car into gear, Lalo's right back at his passenger side window. And he tells Nacho that he not only changed his mind, but he also orders him to drive back to where Saul's car broke down. But not understanding the reasoning for the backtracking, Nacho asks, "And what are we looking for exactly?" And Lalo explains, "The lawyer says that his car broke down around here. So, where is it?" And Nacho questions him about the twins, saying, "But aren't Lionel and Marco waiting for you right now?" And Lalo tells him, "If I'm not there, they know to leave. And if anything, I can just leave tomorrow. But just keep looking out for that car." And after driving a few more miles down the road, they spot the yellow Suzuki at the bottom of a ravine and it's filled with bullet holes. And Lalo goes down to get a better look while Nacho sits outside his car and he's just trying his best not to let his frustrations be noticeable. Because every time that he feels that he's finally done, there's always a just one more thing kind of approach with everyone that he's tangled up with. From Hector with his dad's shop, to Gus with the blackmail, and now Lalo, who even when behind bars was able to get him to burn down Los Pollos Hermanos. And because he's not as predictable as Tuco or Hector, you can just imagine how much anxiety Nacho's feeling, especially now that he's so close to parting ways with Lalo. And when seeing him jump from the cliff face down to the overturned car, he still has no clue what Lalo's looking for. But as Nacho watches him circle the vehicle, he looks around and notices that there's nothing or no one around them for miles. And the more he thinks about it, nobody even knows that they're there. And while keeping an eye on Lalo from above, he can't help but feel the metal from his gun that's in his waistband. And a thought comes to mind. Who would even know? But that thought is gone almost as quick as it came. But when he checks his phone and notices that there's no reception, another thought comes to mind. What if I actually got away with it? And unlike the first thought, this one lingers for a bit, almost like a devil on his shoulder. And now, he can't help but think how easy pulling the trigger would be. And unlike his attempt on Hector's life, in this situation, there's no one around to intervene. And this time, he can ensure that Lalo stays dead. But like with any other plan, there's a flip side to it. And if he did kill Lalo, it's not gonna earn him any favors with Gus. In fact, it might just do the opposite, and that'll just be one more thing that keeps him indebted to him. But maybe it's not Gus that he needs to have his back, but rather Mike, who at least shares the same hatred for the Salamancas, and he knows at the very least that he'd at least hear him out, especially if their last conversation is anything to go by.
First things first. We take care of Lalo, then we'll talk.
And as Lalo looks to be finishing up his investigation, Nacho has maybe 2 minutes to figure out what he's gonna do. And as he's weighing the pros and cons, the only thing that gives him pause is the fact that he has his dad. And if he were to do this, he wants to make sure that he's safe above all else. But in the middle of his thought process, he sees Lalo climbing back up the cliff face. And without a second thought, as Lalo's dusting himself off, Nacho draws his weapon. And even though they only make eye contact for 2 seconds, as Lalo stares down the barrel of the gun, no words will be spoken, but plenty is said in just that passing glance. And as we zoom out to the desert landscape, we would just hear a single shot echo through the hills. And as we cut back to Nacho, we see him digging a grave for Lalo right next to the yellow Suzuki Esteem. And while piling dirt on top of Lalo's body, Nacho will repeat his versions of events of what happened today, and he says it out loud as if though he's talking to Gus. I drove him out to a well somewhere out in the desert. He told me not to wait for him, and I headed back into town. That's all I know. And he keeps saying it until he believes the lie, because once the cartel figures out that Lalo's missing, the first person that's going to be questioned is the last person that's seen him alive. And before that happens, he needs to disappear. So, after an hour and a half of digging, we see Nacho drive away from the area and make his way back into town. And nearly the entire way there, he'd be consistently looking over his shoulder to ensure that he wasn't seen or followed. And that paranoia would make it a very long drive back. Over on the other side of town, we pick up with Gus and Mike over at an old warehouse. And while they wait for Nacho's arrival, they talk about the future plans for the lab now that Lalo's back across the border. But when a red and white muscle car pulls up, Nacho gets out and tells Gus that he dropped Lalo off, and by now, he's probably back in Mexico. And even though his heart is nearly beating out of his chest from how nervous he is, Nacho remains calm in front of Gus, knowing that he just lied to him. But after taking in that information, Gus simply accepts what he was told and tells Nacho to continue to report to Mike until further notice. And once everyone was in agreement, Gus leaves to handle a more pressing matter while Mike and Nacho talk about what's next. And as they watch Gus drive away, Mike says to him, "You okay, kid? You look a little green around the gills." And almost like a switch has been flipped, Nacho's demeanor goes from calm to panic almost instantly, and he tells Mike the truth about what he actually did to Lalo. And with him now understanding the gravity of the situation, Mike tells him, "Kid, your secret's safe with me, but you know the cartel's gonna notice that a Salamanca's missing. So the smart thing to do would be for you to get missing as well." And Nacho says, I know, but I can't leave without my father. I mean, whether it's Gus or the cartel, if I disappear, the first person they're coming after is him." And after understanding that Nacho truly wants to get out the game, they try to come up with a plan that eliminates any suspicion that would come his way. And while rubbing the top of his sunburned head, Mike gets an idea and he says, "I think there's a way to keep the Salamancas and the cartel from looking at you." And Nacho says with curiosity, "Oh yeah? What you have in mind?" And Mike says, "First, you're gonna tell me exactly where you buried Lalo." And the plan would be for Mike to dig up Lalo's body and lead the cartel to the same area where Saul was almost killed. And that way, Lalo's death can be blamed on the people who ambushed Saul, and by doing so, clearing Nacho's name. But after hearing Mike's plan, Nacho says, "I like the idea, but that just keeps me from the Salamancas. But what about Fring? He's the one who has the gun to my father's head." And Mike looks him in the eyes and says, "In order for your father to be safe, you can't be here." And Nacho says, "And how do you know that?" And Mike answers saying, "Well, for starters, you're the only person keeping the Salamanca territory afloat. And if you were to disappear, that would only be beneficial to Fring. And I doubt that he would go after your father for making his life easier." But Nacho says with concern, "But I'm still a loose end. And if he can't get to me, why wouldn't he go after my dad?" And Mike responds saying, "Because whoever decides to, they have to go through me." And after hearing that, it would just leave Nacho with one more question. Why would you do all this for me? Because I can tell that you want something better for yourself. And that would leave Nacho speechless for a moment, because he's never had someone believe in him like that before. And after giving Mike the directions to where to find Lalo's body, the two men shake hands and part ways. But for Nacho, before he leaves town, he makes a stop at his house to pick up a few things and also leave something behind that gives him a little head start. It's been 3 days since Nacho left town, and we pick up at the chicken farm where Gus is being told by Bolsa that Lalo Salamanca is dead. And when asking about more details, the cartel confirmed that his body was found by an old well, and in all likelihood, it could have been a rival gang that killed him. And with the Salamancas having no one to run things on this side of the border, they once again put Nacho in charge. But when they try to reach out to him, nobody can seem to get a hold of him. Whether it's on the streets, on the phone, or even at his house, it looks like he's just disappeared. And after breaking into his house and finding an invoice for a hotel out in Phoenix, Victor, Mike, and Tyrus report to Gus that Nacho left town. And even when sending some guys to the area to bring him back, it would be a pointless mission because Nacho is long gone, and by this time, he's already going by a different name and keeping a low profile. And not to mention that the invoice was fake anyway, and it only served to give him a further head start, which actually succeeded in this case. And Mike says to himself while holding the letter, "Well played, kid. Well played." And with meeting back up at the chicken farm, Gus, Mike, and Tyrus discuss where to start looking for him. But with no solid leads or clues left behind, they're just taking stabs in the dark. So when Mike suggests that Nacho's not worth going after, he brings up the fact that he's the only thing keeping the Salamanca territory going. And now that he's gone, there's basically free reign on his territory until Tuco gets released. And Mike tries to frame it like Nacho's the one doing him a favor, and he says, "And if you're worried about what Varga knows, you know this better than anyone. He doesn't have anything on you that can do any real damage. So our best course of action is just to forget about him and focus on the lab." And had this been anyone else who was calling the shots, maybe he would have let that go. But Gustavo Fring, he just doesn't operate like that, and he needs to know where all of his variables are. So after taking less than 10 seconds to consider Mike's opinion, Gus takes a deep exhale, then gives an order to Tyrus saying, "Bring me Varga's father." And immediately, Mike stands between Tyrus and the door, and he says, "We're not doing that." But Tyrus quickly pulls a gun on Mike, and he says to Gus, "Just say the word." And while waiting on a response, Mike stares down the barrel of the gun and says, "You ever think that Varga's gone because he actually wants to be out? Because I do." And Gus would ask in a more demanding tone, "If there's something that you're not telling me, I advise you to come out with it now." And Mike, who is yet to blink, would tell them, "I'll tell you like I told him. If you want to get to his father, you have to go through me. And if you pull that trigger, just ask yourself, if Varga was going to be any kind of issue, why would he leave his father behind?" And after a few moments of silence, Gus calls Mike's bluff and he says to Tyrus, "Do it." And without even a second thought, Tyrus pulls the trigger and kills Mike where he stands. And as blood and brain matter drips from the walls, Gus tells Tyrus, "Clean up this mess and I'll have Victor get Varga's father." So while Mike would be buried somewhere out in the chicken farm, we cut over to Nacho, who's living a low-profile lifestyle as a mechanic, and he's actually enjoying a more simple life. But as the days turns into weeks, he does get curious about his father and how he's doing. So later that night, he decides to buy a burner phone to call him. And only after 2 rings, he would hear the sound of his father's voice, and for the first time in years, they would actually have a pleasant conversation. And with Nacho saying that he's gone legit working as a mechanic, that would be something that brings a tear to his father's eye, and he would say that he's proud of him. And before getting off the phone, Nacho tells his dad, "One day soon, Papa, I'll come by and visit." But his dad responds saying, "No, Nacho, there's nothing here for you to come back to. But how about instead, one day soon, I come to visit you, my son." And that would nearly bring Nacho to tears, but he holds back his emotions and says, "I'd like that, and I can't wait. But I love you, Papa, and I'll talk to you later." And when Nacho hangs up, he's almost invigorated by the call, and after wiping his tears, he goes back to working on a car with a few of his fellow mechanics. And for his dad, once he hangs up, he gets back to a card game that he's having with a couple of friends. But everything changes when a black SUV pulls up, and on the inside would be Gus, Victor, and 2 low-level men. And before going inside, Victor is told by Gus, if he has no answers, get rid of everyone. Because in the mind of Gus, Mike's last words echo in his head, and although he might have been right about Nacho not being a threat, after killing Mike, Gus figures that he has to follow through and either find Nacho or leave him as the last of his bloodline. And doing this for no other reason than that's just how the game goes. So as he watches Victor go inside to question the men, seconds go by and 5 shots are fired. Then moments later, Victor comes back covered in blood and drinking coffee. And he says to Gus, Varga's dad said he hasn't spoken to him in months. And after hearing that, Gus takes a deep exhale and he says to Victor, it's not a top priority, but I want Varga found. And as the car pulls away, Gus has to deal with the fact that Nacho might be the one that got away. And even though he killed Mike and Papa Varga, he'll never know the loyalty that these men had for Nacho. And that's even when looking death in the eye, those two men had Nacho's back to the very end. Hey everybody, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I really hope you enjoyed another story from the Heisenverse. And, well guys, Nacho finally got his happy ending, but the real question would be, how long before he actually finds out what happened to Mike and his dad? Would he come back during the Breaking Bad timeline to exact his revenge on Gus? Or would he accept that both of his father figures chose to sacrifice themselves in order to keep him safe? And I gotta say, it can go either way, but I think Nacho is smart enough to know that he has no chance against Gus. But who knows? I'm sure that Walter White didn't either, and, well, look how that turned out. But that's just me. But now I want to hear from you guys. What'd you think of this story? Did you like it? Is there anything that you'd change? And what's another story that you'd like for me to cover? Whatever it is, let me know down below in the comments, and I'll do my best to respond. And also, consider becoming a member to get access to videos early, added to the Heisenverse Discord, and even extra content that's not available to the public. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, my name is Murge. Later.